There is a moment that every Prime Minister dreads, the moment when a simple, direct question, the kind a member of the public would ask at a kitchen table, gets asked in Parliament, and there is no answer, no deflection that works, no talking point that holds, just silence where leadership should be, and a man who looks, for all the world, like he wishes he were anywhere else. That moment happened at Prime Minister's Questions. Kemi Badenoch stood up and asked Keir Starmer one question about your energy bill. And what followed was one of the most revealing exchanges this Parliament has seen. Not because of what was said, because of what wasn't. Because of who Starmer pointed to instead of answering. And because of what his body told the entire country when the words finally ran out. This is the story of how Britain's Prime Minister got caught hiding behind his own energy secretary, while the people who voted for him sat at home, opening bills they cannot afford to pay. Your energy bill is higher now than it was when Labour came into office. That is not a political opinion, that is a fact. Ofgem data confirms it. The energy price cap sits above where it was when Starmer walked into Downing Street, promising to make your life more affordable. He said it, repeatedly. Before the election, during the election, after the election, lower energy bills. That was the promise. That was what millions of people voted for. And Kemi Badenoch walked into that chamber with that promise in one hand and the current price cap in the other, and placed them both in front of the Prime Minister and asked him to explain the gap. He couldn't. What he did instead was something that should make every person watching furious. He turned to Ed Miliband. Not metaphorically, not as a reference. He literally deferred the answer to his energy secretary. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom asked about the single biggest household cost facing his electorate, decided that was a question for someone else. That the man responsible for the country's energy policy, the man who stood at a podium and promised to bring bills down, the man who leads the government, that man didn't have an answer about energy bills and pointed sideways instead. Kemi Badenoch's response was 4 words. 4 words that cut through every piece of political theatre in that chamber and landed like a verdict. I thought he was the Prime Minister. Subscribe to this channel right now. What you just heard will not be the headline on the BBC tonight. It will not be the clip shown on the evening news. Mainstream media will give you the government's response, the carefully worded statement, the spin. We will give you exactly what happened in that chamber. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's talk about Ed Miliband, because this story is not just about Starmer. It is about the man Starmer hides behind every time the energy question gets asked, and it is about what that man has done to your bills in the name of a green energy revolution you never voted for and are now paying for. Ed Miliband is Britain's energy secretary. He has held that position since Labour came to power, and in that time he has made a series of decisions, ideological, non-negotiable, implemented at extraordinary speed, that have driven energy costs up, while he and his Prime Minister stand at podiums telling you costs are coming down. He cancelled new North Sea drilling licences. Norway's Labour government drilled 49 wells last year. Britain under Miliband drilled 0. The first time since 1964 that Britain has not drilled a single new well in the North Sea. That is not an energy policy. That is an ideological position being paid for by every household in this country through higher bills. He pushed ahead with the renewable energy transition at a pace that the grid cannot support without the backup of gas power stations that we now import gas to run, because we stopped drilling for our own. He committed to targets that sound impressive in a press release and cost a fortune in practice. And when the bills went up, when the numbers in your direct debit didn't match the promises from the campaign trail, he blamed Russia. He blamed global markets. He blamed the previous government. He blamed everything except the decisions he made. And Starmer let him. More than let him. Starmer has protected Miliband at every PMQs when the energy question has come up, has deflected to him, has used him as a shield, has treated the energy secretary as the answer to every question about energy bills, rather than as the person responsible for them. Kemi Badenoch has asked the energy bill question 6 times at PMQs. 6 times. In each session, Starmer has either deferred to Miliband, referenced the green energy transition, or pointed to the global energy market, as if Britain's policy decisions have no bearing on what you pay. 6 times she has asked a Prime Minister to take responsibility for a promise he made to the British people. 6 times he has found a way not to. That is not leadership. That is a pattern, a deliberate, consistent strategy of avoiding accountability for a decision, the decision to pursue an accelerated green transition without protecting households from the cost that is hitting your pocket every single month. Now here is the part that should make you genuinely angry. Not politically angry, personally angry. The households most affected by the energy price cap are not wealthy households. Wealthy households have newer insulation, newer boilers, newer appliances. They absorb bill increases more easily because energy represents a smaller proportion of their total spending. The households being hit hardest by elevated energy costs are older households, single occupancy households, households in older properties with poor insulation, households on fixed incomes who cannot change their consumption because they're already at the minimum. Your audience, your parents, your neighbours, The people who worked for 40 years, who paid their taxes, who were told the energy market would be fixed and bills would come down under Labour. Those are the people sitting with bills that are higher than they were promised, and a Prime Minister who responded to that fact by turning to his Energy Secretary. Kemi Badenoch named them. She didn't speak in abstractions about household budgets and price cap trajectories. She talked about real people. A retired teacher in the East Midlands spending £400 more on energy annually than she was spending before Labour took office. A couple in their late 60s in the northwest who have turned the heating off entirely in rooms they don't use because they cannot afford to heat the whole house. People who did everything right, who planned their retirements carefully, who are now finding that the cost of keeping warm in Britain has outpaced every calculation they made. Those people watched Starmer point to Miliband, and Miliband had nothing new to say either. Mainstream media will not stay on this story. They will move to the next PMQs, the next press conference, the next government announcement. This channel will not move on. Every time the energy bill promise is broken, every time Starmer deflects and Miliband deflects and your bill stays higher than it should be, we will be here making sure you don't forget what was promised and who broke it. Subscribe now. Share this with someone paying bills they were told would be lower by now. Here is what makes the Miliband angle so significant. This is not just about one bad PMQs exchange. It is about accountability and who in this government is actually making decisions. Ed Miliband was given the energy brief with what colleagues describe as almost total autonomy. His green energy agenda is not a government policy in the usual sense. It is a personal mission that Starmer handed him the keys to and largely stood back from. When things go well, both men take credit. When bills go up, Starmer points to Miliband as the expert. When Miliband's decisions are challenged, Starmer says energy policy is a matter for the Energy Secretary. It is the perfect political arrangement if you want to pursue an unpopular policy without taking personal responsibility for it. And it works until someone like Kemi Badenoch stands up and refuses to let the deflection land. Because when she asked the question, when she stood there with the data and the broken promise and the specific number of how much higher bills are than when Labour took office, she wasn't asking Ed Miliband, she was asking the Prime Minister, the person the country elected, the person who made the promise, the person who should be able to look across the dispatch box and say, yes, bills are higher, here is why, here is what we are doing, and here is when it changes. He could not do it. And the moment he reached sideways for Miliband instead of forward with an answer, he told everyone watching exactly where the buck stops in this government. Nowhere. It stops nowhere. There is always someone else, always another minister, another department, another set of global circumstances that mean the person standing at the dispatch box is not the person responsible for the thing being asked about. Kemi Badenoch called it, calmly, precisely, with the kind of clarity that comes from having asked the same question 6 times and watched the same evasion 6 times and knowing that this time she had the room with her. A Prime Minister who cannot answer for his government's central economic promise. An Energy Secretary who has pursued an ideological agenda at the cost of household bills and hides behind global markets when challenged. And 10 million people opening energy bills that are higher than they were promised they would be, watching their Prime Minister look across the chamber and shrug. That is the story. That is what happened. And that is what Kemi Badenoch forced into the open in one exchange that mainstream media will trim to 30 seconds and contextualize into irrelevance. The promise was lower bills. The reality is higher bills. The response is to point to someone else. And the only person in that chamber who refused to accept that, who kept pushing, kept naming the broken promise, kept demanding that someone take responsibility, was Kemi Badenoch. Share this video with everyone you know who has opened an energy bill this year and wondered where the promised relief is. Share it with everyone who voted for change and is still waiting. Share it with everyone who deserves to know that their Prime Minister was asked a direct question about their money and decided it was someone else's job to answer it. Because they are counting on you accepting this. On you absorbing the higher bill and moving on. On the story fading and the next news cycle replacing it. And the broken promise quietly disappearing into the background noise of a government that makes commitments and outsources the consequences. Don't accept it. The promise was made. The bills are higher, and someone should answer for it.